There is no 32-bit Super NES.
The Sega 32X is a system of legend, almost of myth. It seemed to exist for such a fleeting moment that its existence could have almost been imagined. But yet, the Genesis 32X, as it was known in the States, Mega Drive 32X in Europe, and Japan's Super 32X all existed in their respective regions, and are actually remembered fondly by a faithful few. So let's unravel this short 90s tale of 32-bit superiority and see what went right and exactly what went wrong for this Sega Genesis and Mega Drive add-on.
40 times more than Super NES.
The year is 1994, and the Sega Genesis is now firmly the favourite games console in North America, Europe and Australia. The Nintendo Entertainment System had long held the reign in North America, but its 8-bit hardware was now dated and unappealing.
I said chocolate chip.
In Europe, the Mega Drive was the cheapest 16-bit entry, pushing aside the old 8-bit micros, consoles and even 16-bit hardware like the Amiga and Atari ST. Of course, Nintendo weren't blind to this, and had pushed their Super Nintendo out in North America during 1991 and Europe in 1992, where it was rapidly gaining traction. Sega had originally countered this threat with the launch of the Mega CD in 1992 and 93 respectively. This was also a Mega Drive add-on designed to capitalise on the storage capacity of CD-ROM whilst mopping up the PC Engine CD system in Japan and Super NES in other regions. As we know, however, this was less successful than intended, with a high initial price tag and the majority of FMV games proving to be less appealing than they looked. So, it's here, on the 8th of January 1994, where we find Joe Miller of Sega America and Sega of Japan CEO Hayao Nakayama in a meeting directly before the Las Vegas Winter CES. There were other personnel in attendance from both regions, including Sega of America's president Tom Kalinske, but it was Nakayama who raised the need to build and deploy a 32-bit cartridge system before the end of 1994. This concept was already gifted with the codename Mars, but unbeknownst to Sega of America, Japan were already working on another prototype known as Saturn. This was intentionally kept hush to avoid leaks. Nakayama's push for an interim console was due to fears the Saturn wouldn't be ready before the end of 1994, leaving Sega exposed to new machines like the Atari Jaguar, 3DO, and even whispers of a new machine from Sony. This interim machine would be cheaper and compatible with existing Mega Drive titles, the idea being that Mega Drive owners would stick with the Sega brand, giving them access to the cherished world of 32-bit, whilst still having access to their existing game libraries. Before the meeting's end, the original concept for Mars was presented by Japan's hardware designer Hideki Sato. At this stage, it was simply a Mega Drive with an additional Hitachi Super H1 processor and a larger colour palette of 512 with 128 on-screen colours. It was then Joe Miller who pointed out that creating a whole new system around a slightly upgraded Mega Drive was a waste of resources, and instead they should focus on an add-on unit for existing owners. From this point onward, Sega of America took project ownership and got to work. According to Joe Miller, 3 main designs for the new Mars add-on were proposed. The first was similar to Hideki Sato's concept, with a Hitachi Super H1 and a new video display processor. This combination would likely achieve levels similar to the Sega Virtua processor, or SVP, which was another route already in development, having been announced in 1993 and culminating in the release of Virtua Racing for the stock Mega Drive in March 1994. This SVP chip was Sega's rival to the Super FX chip found in certain SNES titles, and allowed cut-down releases of Sega's Virtua arcade games based on their new Model 1 board. The second concept was based around dual Motorola 68000 combined with the VDP, and the third, suggested by Sega of Japan, consisted of dual SH2 processors and an upgraded custom VDP, creating a complicated but potent hardware combination. The Hitachi SH2 RISC processor was actually created by Hitachi with Sega's new console in mind. The cost savings through creating an add-on, as opposed to a stand-alone console, allowed for an increased specification without affecting the final retail price, and therefore the latter option was chosen for progression. Besides this, the specification was homogeneous to what Japan were developing for the Sega Saturn, and so familiarising developers with the dual processor setup seemed a no-brainer. By this point, several months into the year, Sega of America became aware of the Saturn's development, and with both machines on course for release before the end of the year, some eyebrows were raised in both American and Japanese camps. Sega of America weren't geared up to produce Mars, and so Japan's resources would need to be split, and this looked like the start of Sega creating a battle with itself. Both figuratively and literally, the Mars hardware was designed to sit as a layer on top of the Mega Drive, whereas the Mega CD sat below it. While the Mega CD still used the Mega Drive's video output, and was therefore constrained by both its bandwidth and 64 on-screen colours, Mars would have its own video output, which could fuse with the Mega Drive, creating a layer of greater control and ability. This allowed 32,768 on-screen colours, 2 digital sound channels, an extra 512 kilobytes of RAM, and 3D support, pushing 50,000 textured or 160,000 flat polygons per second. To put this in comparative terms, Nintendo's FX2 chip can render 2,000 textured polygons per second, the Atari Jaguar can do 10,000, and the 3DO can push 20,000. The audio abilities would also be improved with a 2-channel PWM audio chip with 3-dimensional Q sound to complement the Mega Drive's existing hardware. Apart from the dual SH2s and RAM, all other components of the 32X are actually controlled by the Mega Drive's Motorola 68000, and although the dual SH2 processors pack a decent punch, their RISC architecture means sprite features such as scaling have to be coded through software. The VDP does utilise a double frame buffer, however, allowing for implementations such as hardware scrolling. This fusing of hardware could be used in a variety of ways, but would often allow developers to put the Mega Drive's hardware to task, rendering game backgrounds, for example, whilst the 32X could handle the bulk of the action. Sitting atop of the Mega Drive in a mushroom fashion, the system would need to accept Mega Drive cartridges with a pass-through feature, although the new 32-bit cartridges would be slightly larger to differentiate. Of course, differentiating this new hardware from its 16-bit mother console was key. Therefore, the name 32X was used to highlight the 32-bit architecture. Some corners argue that it stands for 32 times the power, but given the Motorola 68000 runs at some 1 million instructions per second, whilst the dual SH2s can reportedly push around 40 million, that figure could have been even higher. So given its initial name was simply the Genesis 32 or Mega Drive 32, it's clear Sega were keen to push on the bit bandwagon. Nakayama approved the design, and production began at Sega's Japanese manufacturing plant, forcing Sega to split their resources. It's clear at this stage that although Sega of Japan were on board with this project, there were those who saw the 32X as simply a distraction to the Saturn, and vice versa. Sega of America could already see what problems the Saturn may bring about. Nevertheless, 32X development pressed on with great speed, with news and rumours of its development circling in the press from April onwards, a month after we'd actually seen drawings of the new Saturn. By the summer CES on the 23rd of June 1994, a Sega 32 system was on show to the eager press. To us in the UK, it was presented as simply the Sega Mega 32, and offered a glimmer of hope for Mega Drive owners. Now, it's interesting what people wanted at the time. If you look back over old magazines, we see promises that this Mega 32 would bring VHS quality FMV to Mega CD owners, and that it offered semi-Saturn compatibility, all for a meagre £150. Some of these plus points are things we simply disregard these days. We look at FMV and note how terrible it was, or we look at Sega's timeline and scoff at their timing in regard to the Saturn. But it's easy to forget how tantalising an affordable 32-bit upgrade seemed back then, FMV and all. The FMV claim does seem a bit bizarre, but in some respects it shows Sega's desire to continue serving their existing customers, Mega CD owning or not. By July, we had a whole plethora of developers reportedly lined up to produce titles for this new mushroom-shaped device. This was a truly exciting time. Interesting to note, however, is that developers had generally received both Saturn and 32X development kits at the same time. This idea of developers cutting their teeth on the 32X may have seemed good from the outset, but given the Saturn's Japanese release schedule was looking concurrent to the 32X, it's clear that many now simply bet on the Saturn, leaving 32X titles a little thin on the ground. Still, at the time, there was no suggestion of this. Some of the titles hyped pre-release included Sonic 4 in true three-dimensional glory, Shadow of Atlantis, which promised that upgraded FMV we still seemed hooked on, and a tantalising Alien trilogy. The penned launch releases included Doom, Fahrenheit, Star Wars Arcade, Super Afterburner, Super Motocross, and Virtua Racing, with various others on the way.
Mysterious machine has appeared in homes across America.
Alright, baby.
Increase the power of the unit 40 times.
The 32X would launch on the 21st of November 1994 in North America for $159.99. A good conversion rate against the yen meant it actually launched some $20 less than expected, but with a slight change to the lineup. Available titles were Cosmic Carnage, Doom, Star Wars Arcade, and Virtua Racing Deluxe. Rather than the plastic hard cases of the Mega Drive, 32X cartridges would find themselves nestled within a bed of cardboard, much like a Super NES title, and as such, much less resistant to damage as well. Apart from the woeful Cosmic Carnage, the other titles offered a reasonable lineup, with Star Wars Arcade the most hyped and featured of the bunch. This was an instantly recognisable franchise which made good use of the new hardware, although not everyone liked it.
By no stretch of imagination is it worth £60 and £170 to get the system as well. Let's hope the next games that come out are better than this.
Despite this, by some it's referred to as the game that saved Sega in 1995, and that's mainly because Nintendo were still batting well from their 16-bit corner. Released in late November was Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, and thanks to its incredible looking pre-rendered sprites and strong marketing campaign, it showed the Super Nintendo could still make punches. But Sega weren't joking about with the 32X. It's easy to dismiss it, but they bestowed a $10 million marketing campaign upon it.
Should the cabin experience a sudden graphic change, the 32X is equipped with high-speed RISC processors and dual frame buffers that allow rendering of 50,000 polygons per second, texture mapping,
the same as they had pushed for the Mega Drive, and this time it was even more controversial. A whole host of TV advertising,
Sincere condolences.
What a waste.
When you start with the Genesis,
print, and promotional videos, much like the Sega CD,
Your messenger for 32X
would follow. This included an advert depicting the 32X, the Mega Drive, in order to produce an arcade machine.
To bridge the gap until the Saturn's official UK release next year, Sega are releasing this today.
On the 1st of December, the 32X would see its rollout in Europe, although units weren't widely available until a few days later, with the UK price actually bumped to £169.99 because, you know, we often got screwed back then. Like North America, we witnessed a television and print campaign targeting the unit at Mega Drive owners who may have grown up a little since their original purchase.
Regarde, c'est Chloé, la poupée qui fait à manger.
Sega 32X.
Although it was on a smaller scale than the States. Other areas such as Australia and Brazil witnessed a similar launch. Japan's launch on the 3rd of December was even more low-key, with the Sega Saturn having already released 2 weeks prior, where it was promoted heavily and subsequently sold heavily. Sega had hoped to push out over 1 million 32X units before 1994 was out. Instead, this number sat at just over 600,000 in North America, with some of these units still sitting on store shelves. In other regions, this figure was far lower. This was the key launch holiday season, so Sega would have to put their all behind the machine to keep it rolling into 1995. Fortunately, this was exactly what Sega of America looked to be doing.
Virtual Racing Deluxe. Man, this is as good as the arcade. What's this?
Mankind is driven to double and redouble his powers.
The Winter CES took place on the 6th of January 1995, and of course the Sega Saturn was featured alongside the lone Virtua Fighter title. But Sega also dedicated a large portion to the 32X, featuring numerous titles including the now ready and graphically impressive Metalhead, alongside the only Psych-derived title to appear on the system, Chaotix, or Knuckles Chaotix as it would be released in the US. Sadly for now, Sonic 4 was just a pipe dream, much to the disappointment to 32X owners. Unfortunately, not only did you require an appointment to get into Sega's booth at the CES, but they also had no killer title to push. Knuckles Chaotix itself wasn't terribly impressive, based on a prototype game in development for the Mega Drive, and it divided opinion in the gameplay stakes. This key period was where the 32X would make or break it, and evidently it started to break, with many simply sidelining the add-on as a stopgap for the Saturn.
One wants to know, will the 32X software deliver on all the hype? Will the 32X make Genesis and Sega CD systems obsolete?
No, quite the contrary.
Hey, building up to multiple word answers here.
Rather than appealing as a cheaper option as intended to their next generation console, most people just decided to bide their time and save their money for a console that could push 5 times the number of polygons per second. I mean, in reality, the 32X wasn't actually that cheap. Given the initial units had no bundled game, you'd have to shell out an extra £50 on top of the $170. Sega would phase in a £50 rebate voucher to help with this, but people wanted money off, rather than the complication of claiming vouchers that they could only use to spend on games. Additionally, it's reported that some of the original shipment came without a Mega Drive 1 connector, leaving consumers to buy an adapter for some £25, or at worst an entire Mega Drive 2 to ensure compatibility. And talking about what came in the box, along with the Mega Drive 1 cable adapter and Mega Drive 2 case adapter, we have some metal inserts which are supposed to slip into the cartridge port and connect with these metal plates on the 32X. These were to reduce radio emissions and conform to FCC requirements. Some boxes, however, also contained these dongles to plug into the Mega Drive expansion bus. These dongles earthed the pins, further appeasing FCC regulations. But apparently its inclusion was overkill, and many units simply didn't include them, especially regions outside of the North American regulations. Again, due to regulations, the North American packaging indicates the unit isn't compatible with the CDX, but in fact it connects up and works just fine. I mean, proportionally it looks like an adult squeezing into a toy car, but it works. Sega had actually developed a cradle to make it fit better, but apparently it wasn't commercially viable, and therefore it was shelved. Now, all these dongles, adapters and clips brings us onto the aesthetic. So we need to connect the AV cable from the Mega Drive to the 32X. Then the 32X plugs into the TV. We then have separate power supplies for each device, and if you have a Mega CD as well, it really starts to get quite messy. Sega actually released their own power strip to deal with this problem in the States, providing adequate spacing between each connector for the bulky transformers. Later consoles then followed Nintendo's lead and incorporated power units into the console casing, which was much better. But you know what? I don't care about the extra wires, about the upsetting aesthetic, or any of these so-called issues. I would have given my right arm for one of these in early 1995. I would have been more than happy with the games on offer as well, even if Doom is squashed into a small window, lacking levels, and has absolutely horrific music. It was the price that put it all out of reach for me, and it did for others. Some became disillusioned with Sega entirely, having released the Mega CD to limited support, now the 32X, and the Saturn just around the corner. It looked like Sega were just trying to cash in wherever possible.
Is this the best you can do? I'm not impressed. I gotta be honest with you, this whole game thing doesn't work for me. It's a phase, like the hula hoops.
Man, you don't know what you're talking about.
Max!
Hey, I know what I know. And what I know is, I gave you kids a shot, and you blew it. And maybe you should consider a different line of work. Trust me, it's for the better.
Whilst Nintendo owners were rewarded with a string of continuing titles for their older systems. For many, these suspicions were confirmed in May 1995 when Sega brought forward the Saturn release by several months, priced at $399 and poised to compete with the Sony PlayStation. There wasn't a mass exodus, however, mainly because developers such as Capcom, Acclaim and EA Sports had already left. This was more expediting what was already occurring. The only glimmer of hope for existing 32X owners was talk by Sega of America of a Sega Neptune console. This would incorporate the Mega Drive and 32X in one sleek unit, similar to the original Mars proposal. However, the rumoured price tag of $400 seemed ridiculous, especially given it matched the Saturn's price. The anticipated price was halved later in the year, making it more attractive, but by October Sega put a halt on production of any consoles other than the Saturn, and the future looked bleak for cartridge fans. We know that putting all your eggs in one basket can be a poor move. However, Sega had demonstrated that chucking various eggs into a multitude of baskets was equally as poor. The remainder of 1995 witnessed a drip of titles, including FIFA Soccer 96, Starfleet Academy, WWF Raw, and the delayed Virtua Fighter. The final two games for the platform emerged in January 1996, Spider-Man Web of Fire and the European release Dark Side, which was penned to be the Neptune's launch title, and actually it plays incredibly smoothly. Although some European releases, such as Primal Rage, were delayed until later in 1996. By this point, units had been through several price drops, and by the middle of 1996, 32X consoles could be picked up for as little as $20, leaving a raw feeling in the guts of those who paid full price just a year earlier. Further raw feelings came from games, or lack of games, such as Romance of the Three Kingdoms 4 and the much anticipated Shadow of Atlantis, which sadly failed to ever see daylight, stuck in a late development phase and left to waste away, like a discarded coffee cup. There remain mixed feelings about the 32X. Some see it as a lesson in spreading yourself too thinly. Others see it as a console which served its purpose and kept the Mega Drive going for just that bit longer. I personally see it as the upgrade which could have been so much more had it hung on a little longer, had the Saturn been launched a little later, had developers had more time with its development kits, had the price been that bit cheaper. I think if things had panned out differently, we would have seen some amazing games that got the most from this little mushroom-shaped add-on. As it stands, it still remains an exciting bit of kit which captures my imagination as much today as it did in 1994. One thing that Tom Kalinske said in 2006, which bears true for both the 32X and the Mega CD, is this.
I think in hindsight, to me, the great lesson is don't ever expect an add-on device to be as important as a true new platform. And I think that's what we had in mind. We thought we were going to sell millions of those, and that was unrealistic.
Sega did manage to sell around 1 million units, some 700,000 in North America, 270,000 in Japan, and around 100,000 in other regions, but this was less than half of the Mega CD, which Sega had also themselves considered a commercial failure. The 32X hardware would be used once more in the Sega Picture Magic, a Japanese tablet for use with the Sega Digio SJ1 and the Sega Pryphone. The main purpose of these devices is for photo manipulation, making use of those powerful Hitachi processors. So that brings the tale of the 32X to a close. There was a point where they sold for peanuts, but now in the UK you'll be lucky to grab one from eBay for less than £100. It appears they're more popular now than they ever were. But before I go, let's do a bit of spot the difference between Mega CD games and their upgraded Mega CD 32X iterations. There were 6 Mega CD 32X compatible games in total, but let's start with Corpse Killer, the first game to make use of both add-ons. And what do we see? Well, not a lot. Now this always got me. I expected this combination to herald unbelievable power, and indeed I bet it could given the time and the right development, but instead we just got very slightly enhanced versions of Mega CD games. Did we get that promised VHS quality? Well, it's certainly better on some games, given we can now experience more colours, but VHS quality? I just don't think it can handle the bitrate. Let's finish up with Night Trap on the Mega CD 32X as we fade to black. Thanks for watching the Sega 32X story. If you'd like to see some previous stories, then click here. You can also subscribe to stay updated or contribute to my Patreon to support future videos. In any case, thank you very much for watching and have a great evening.